The movie begins in 1975 in White Mountain, Arizona, where a group of co-workers and friends are speeding down a mountain road in their car, seemingly frightened by something they had seen earlier on the road. The vehicle was driven through shrubs and ditches but eventually screeched to a sudden halt as they reached the town. The four men emerge from the car. They enter a local bar and gather around the table. Their faces are in shock, still unable to accept what has happened to them. Their shocked expressions catch the attention of a waitress who informs them that the kitchen is closed. Recognizing the distress on their faces, the waitress senses something unusual has occurred. Mike, one of the frightened loggers, insists that they must stick to their story, no matter how challenging it might become. David reassures Mike, affirming their support and urging him to take action. Mike approaches a booth with his friends backing and hesitates momentarily before dialing a number. After making the call, he rejoins the group. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Frank receives a call from the sergeant regarding a peculiar case. Acknowledging the call, Frank heads to the bar where he finds Mike and his friends anxiously waiting for the police. Upon his arrival, he is greeted by the town sheriff, who commends Frank for having a flawless record without any unsolved cases throughout his career. The sheriff briefs Frank on the strange case, explaining that a group of young men, Mike and his crew, filed a missing persons report. The sheriff expresses his high regard for Mike. He calls his deputy, Dennis, who provides the lieutenant with the names of the other crew members, David and Greg, who are high school students, and two others named Robert and Alan. After resolving initial concerns, the sheriff believes it would be best for Frank to hear the complete story directly from the group. Upon meeting them, Frank notices that most members are willing to cooperate except for Alan, who appears to be ignoring the conversation with his loud behavior. Frank decides to focus on Mike, the group leader, and begins to inquire about Travis, the friend they had lost on the road. Mike shares that Travis was his closest friend, almost like a brother, and they had practically grown up together. On the morning of the incident, Mike had been in a foul mood after an argument with his wife about a bank loan. Travis arrived on his bike, attempting to cheer him up by showing a drawing he had made depicting their envisioned future, a dream of owning a motor sales place together. However, Mike, preoccupied with immediate financial concerns, dismissed the idea, emphasizing the need to finish contracts and pay the mortgage. Despite their disagreement, they set off on the road, picking up the other loggers along the way. The six men headed towards the mountain, bantering during the car ride. Notably, Alan and Travis seemed to clash, resulting in a fight Mike quelled. Upon arrival, they promptly began work, clearing the thick forest. As dusk approached, they completed the job and decided to return. Back at the bar, Frank questioned each member, confirming they were going along with Mike's account. Suspicious of Alan's aggressive behavior, Frank directs his attention towards him. When asked about any issues with Travis, Alan jokingly reassured that there was no real problem between them. Growing weary of the banter, the sheriff intervenes, urging the group to tell Frank what they had witnessed. Being the first to notice, Alan described seeing what appeared to be a fire in the distance. He pointed it out to the group, who initially found it peculiar. Initially, they assumed the reddish hue was just the sun setting, but soon realized that an hour had passed without the sunset. Mike initially thought it was a forest fire until the light began to move. Travis suggested pulling over to investigate, but Mike refused, convinced it was a forest fire and fearing they'd be trapped. Suddenly, they were intercepted by something in the sky. Travis, ignoring warnings from the group, hurried out of the car to get a better look at the hovering aircraft. The group screamed for him to return, but before they could act, a bright light from the spacecraft enveloped Travis, lifting him across the field. Despite Mike's desire not to abandon his friend, the group forced him to drive away, fearing for their safety. Hurrying back, Mike felt intense guilt for leaving Travis behind. He asked the others to leave the car, promising to return for them after finding Travis. When Mike reached where Travis had fallen, there was no trace of him, not even in the surrounding woods. Tearfully, Mike tells Frank that he tried his best but couldn't find his friend, convinced that whatever hovered above them had taken Travis. Frank scrutinized the men momentarily and questioned whether they truly expected him to believe their account. David earnestly assured Frank of their honesty, but despite their unwavering insistence, Frank remained skeptical, unmoved by the sheriff's faith in their story. Frank sarcastically remarked that it was quite a story and urged them not to leave before the police gathered all their numbers and addresses. Outside, the sheriff and Frank investigated Mike's truck, which looked like it had been through significant wear and tear. The sheriff assured the men that come morning, he would dispatch numerous police officers into the woods to search for Travis. Upon being released from custody, Mike came home and was confronted by a woman who appeared as a ghost. To him, she turned out to be Mike's sister, Dana, who also happened to be Travis's girlfriend. Mike's wife, Katie, informed her husband that the news had spread over the radio, depicting it as a joke. Mike reassured his family that it was no joke and disclosed the police's plan to send out a search party the following morning. The next day, the 5 vloggers joined the rest of the search party to head up the mountain for Travis. While attempting to pinpoint Travis's location, Dan, Travis's brother, confronted Mike. Dan warned Mike that there would be consequences if anything had happened to his brother. Suddenly, the dogs picked up on something, prompting the group to gather and investigate. After examining the bones found by the dogs, the sheriff concluded they were not human, and the search continued. After a day of searching, Mike returned home and sat on his bed, pondering what might have transpired with his friend. His persistent wife, Katie, nags him about the lost contract. Irritated, he assured her he would find a solution, surprised that she would bring it up after what had occurred. Katie told her husband it wasn't solely about the money, but also about the hurtful things the townspeople were saying. She reassured him that she didn't share the same opinions but urged him to be honest with her. Deeply gazing into his wife's eyes, Mike promised her he had shared everything he knew that night, visibly upset by what had transpired. He decided to head out to a local diner. The old clerk there mentioned receiving calls from various people inquiring about Mike and his friend's stories. Before leaving, Mike requested the clerk to keep his presence a secret. The following morning, a camera crew arrived at Mike's house. Mike and David declined to give any statement and quickly drove away to avoid prying eyes. As they entered town, people began pointing and gossiping about them. At the diner, they met up with the rest of the crew, and soon Frank and the sheriff joined them. Frank took Mike aside and questioned why he hadn't been forthcoming about the altercation between Alan and Travis on the disappearance day. Despite probing, Mike didn't provide answers. Frank then gazed intently at him, expressing that while he didn't believe Mike had killed Travis, he couldn't understand why he would cover for Alan. After this peculiar confrontation, Mike and David went off to find Alan. They located him in his trailer and informed him about the lie detector test. Although initially hesitant, Mike convinced Alan to participate in the test after a lengthy argument. The news of the alleged alien abduction drew international attention, causing the town to be inundated with tourists. Townspeople gathered at the town hall expressing frustration about the influx of strangers. They adamantly believed they knew what had happened and pointed fingers at Mike and his friends. In a passionate outburst, Mike stormed into the town hall expressing disappointment at his former friends' belief in their guilt. Determined to prove their honesty, he loudly took the lie detector test. When the crew arrived at the police station for the tests, they found it swarming with paparazzi. They met the experts who would conduct the lie detector test, and the procedure commenced. After hours of sitting in a quiet room and answering questions, Frank returned with the results, explaining to the crew that the findings were inconclusive. He informed them they would need to return the next day. Enraged by their treatment, Mike began yelling at Frank, refusing to undergo further tests and threatening to press charges. After the crew left, the expert informed the sheriff and Frank that, contrary to what was communicated, the results were in fact positive, confirming the boys were telling the truth. Later at home, Mike received a mysterious call from a gas station phone booth with someone claiming Travis was on the other line. Mike, Dana, Dan, and David hurriedly rushed to the location Travis told them, and upon arriving, they found their friend naked and shivering in the cold. Disoriented from his experiences, they provided him with clothing, called the authorities, and waited for their arrival. After a few hours, Travis started becoming more coherent and recognized everyone. Suddenly, he began to experience seizures triggered by flashbacks of the traumatic events during his absence. Rushed to the hospital, Travis continued having these distressing flashbacks, eventually losing consciousness for several days. During this time, Travis remained traumatized, barely speaking or eating. His best friend Mike came to him and said, "I was so worried about you that I asked the others to leave the car and I went to look for you alone, but I couldn't find you." At that instant, Travis accused him of lying, saying they all abandoned him and fled like cowards. Mike felt furious because he was the only one who searched for Travis that night. He confronted Travis, blaming him for everything. "If you hadn't left the car, nothing would have happened. Because of you, the whole town treated us like criminals." Hearing their argument, the nurse intervened, advising Mike not to disturb Travis as he needed rest. Angry, Mike stormed out of the room. After some time, Travis was discharged from the hospital. Upon returning home, Travis was greeted by friends and family, but the flashbacks persisted. Overwhelmed, he couldn't cope with the scary memories, hiding underneath a table. In his flashbacks, Travis woke up in a strange cocoon filled with a gooey substance, feeling disoriented and confused. Breaking free from the elastic shell, he looked around but suddenly plummeted from his pod. Grabbing a nearby rope, he realized he was in a zero-gravity environment, suspended mid-air. He pulled himself up and entered another pod, encountering a decaying human body. Filled with fear, he hurriedly pulled himself out, climbing upward toward a light source. Reaching the light, he found it emanated from a door that could lead outside. However, the door was locked, surrounded by peculiar objects. He moved back, but luckily spotted the key to unlock the door. Travis. Attempting to catch the key, the zero gravity made it nearly impossible. Despite his struggles, the key drifted toward the door. Travis also reached the door, only to be frightened by the presence of strange, creepy creatures. Approaching one, he discovered it was a spacesuit. As he investigated further, another creature inside a different spacesuit attacked him. Reacting quickly, Travis kicked the creature's face, causing its mask to come off, revealing a scary-looking alien. Startled, Travis dashed into a nearby hole to escape, but the alien caught hold of his feet and dragged him into a peculiar laboratory. They tore off all his clothes and removed the necklace from his neck. Then they covered his body with a cloth and released something that sucked the air between the cloth and Travis's body. Travis was in terrible pain and kept screaming, but the aliens didn't stop. They covered his face with the same cloth, making it hard for him to breathe. They cut the cloth around his mouth and one eye. Then they used tools to keep his mouth and eye open. They put some weird brown jelly-like stuff in his mouth and white liquid in his eye. They tried doing something with a machine, but just as it got close to his eye, Chris suddenly woke up from remembering all of this. He felt stuck, unable to move, haunted by these scary memories. Travis was seated nearby in his doctor's office, accompanied by Dana, the sheriff, and Frank. Despite Travis's account, Frank remained distrustful, waiting for the truth to surface. He expressed skepticism, deeming the story a well-rehearsed hoax. The sheriff, though doubtful, remained open-minded. Then the time passed, and after 2.5 years, Travis and Dana were married, expecting their second child. Travis bid farewell to his family before driving to Mike's remote house deep in the woods. The two friends took a drive together, heading to the place where Travis had been abducted. Mike expressed his discomfort with the location, which Travis also acknowledged. Travis revealed his ongoing struggle with sleep since the traumatic incident, but emphasized his attempt to move forward. During their conversation, Travis conveyed how much everyone missed Mike and encouraged him to return to normal life. He also apologized for blaming Mike and acknowledged his responsibility for getting out of the truck. As the movie concluded, the two shared a poignant moment, reconciling and agreeing to renew their friendship. Mike and Travis got into Travis's car and drove away, symbolizing their newfound understanding and reconciliation.